All right, guys, we're going to get started shortly here on the program. Looking forward to connecting with you guys on a Tuesday. Do me a favor, hit that like button and comment on the show, share the show. Give it a like and a share, guys, anywhere you are watching. We will get started in a matter of moments. We're going to talk some Anthony Poindexter news today. So multiple media outlets, including the first boss I had out of UVA, Jerry Ratcliffe, who's a good man, reporting that Anthony Poindexter could be hired as early as today, maybe even tomorrow. And we'll talk about the impact of the Poindexter hire, not only from a football program standpoint, but from a UVA standpoint, from a city of Charlottesville standpoint, from a local economy standpoint. So we'll cover that on today's program. We will talk on today's show Siren Restaurant, Laura Farner's restaurant, had a soft opening yesterday. The grand opening is Thursday. We'll talk Laura Farner's new restaurant, Siren, in the old Shabine location today on the program. We will talk Roanoke banning downtown sleeping for its houseless population. So if you're houseless in downtown Roanoke, you're no longer allowed to sleep on the sidewalks in downtown, and the police can come and get involved if houseless people are sleeping in downtown Roanoke sidewalks. I'll take a look at that. I'll look at that storyline and apply it to Charlottesville today on the program. There's a piece of property on West Main Street, the old right next to the old Music Resource Center in the church, that currently is for rent. We'll give you the specs on that property in today's show. We'll talk about perhaps a market overreaction to Omicron and how the market's doing now. And Goldman's CEO said policy and the government is the biggest risk to the markets today and not a pandemic. We'll touch those topics with Alex Erpy today on the program. A lot to cover on the Tuesday edition of the I Love CVille show. Judah Wickhauer, our director. We can rock and roll when you're ready. Good Tuesday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille show. Thank you kindly for joining us live in Charlottesville, across the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille network. And today, presented by Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine. Dr. Wagner and his team at Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine have your back. Dr. Wagner and Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine, proudly serving the Charlottesville and Central Virginia communities and beyond for decades. Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine. A lot to cover on the program. We will take a look on Anthony Poindexter, that's looking more and more every day like the head coach in waiting to replace Bronco Mendenhall with a surprise resignation of Thursday evening of last week. Virginia's athletic department has moved quickly. Here we are Tuesday, and the Poindexter hiring could happen as early as this afternoon. So multiple outlets, ESPN, my former boss Jerry Ratcliffe. Today, the Daily Progress had a story, and it's looking like Poindexter's the guy. I want to take a look at how Poindexter could impact not only the Virginia football program, but the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and Central Virginia in totality, including their economies. I think it's going to have a tremendously positive impact. Granted, the proof is going to be in the pudding, and whether or not he gets victories or not. But out of the gate, bringing in alumni, arguably the most well-credentialed alumni, certainly on a short list of well-credentialed Virginia football alumni. This guy's going to get the fan base charged, and we'll reflect on how that's going to impact our local markets today on the show. I also want to talk Virginia basketball. They're a 4.5-point favorite at JMU. Travel to Harrisonburg tonight, 6:30 tip-off on the CBS Sports Network. Laura Farner, formerly of Dooner's restaurant fame, formerly of the Dumpling food truck. Her new restaurant, Siren, opens Thursday of this week in the old Shabin location. She had a soft opening yesterday on her veranda. We'll talk Siren Restaurant on today's program. We'll also talk Roanoke. The city of Roanoke has banned its homeless population from sleeping on its downtown sidewalks. Now police officers can get involved with the homeless who are sleeping in downtown Charlottesville. A 5-2 ordinance passed by City Council in Roanoke yesterday banning the sleeping of houseless individuals in downtown Roanoke. We'll talk about that on the program. Alex Erpy will join us in about 10 minutes, the CEO of Emergent Financial Services, to talk about if the market overreacted to the Omicron variant, and Goldman's CEO on record today on Squawk on the Street saying to the gang that it's policy in government, in Congress, and the Fed that will have more impact on what happens to the markets and the economy than the pandemic will in 2022. So if the CEO of Goldman is saying it's policy, Congress, and the Fed that's going to impact the economy more than a pandemic we've never seen before, I want to get to the bottom of this with Alex Erpy in about 9 minutes on today's show. First, let's talk the Poindexter hiring. Jerry Ratcliffe, the Daily Progress, and a handful of other media outlets are reporting that Anthony Poindexter could be hired as the next Virginia football coach as early as today, maybe as late as tomorrow. In fact, Anthony Poindexter is currently going through the interview process with UVA Athletic Director Carla Williams while in Las Vegas. Poindexter is in Las Vegas as we speak and is being interviewed by the top dog, the head honcho, the CEO of the athletic department, Carla Williams. This, in my opinion, and I touched on this briefly last week, is a slam dunk hire. You look at the Virginia football program, and one word that you could sum up the fan base for Virginia football is apathy. And apathy is a damning description for a fan base, especially at the collegiate level, and certainly for a local ecosystem that relies on this one sports team more than any other sports team within the ecosystem. You watch what happened against Virginia Tech and you saw empty seats against an arch rival. Empty seats in a game that had significant implications for Virginia football as it was trying to improve its bowl standing and, even more importantly, beat an in-state nemesis. During that Hokie clash, empty seats galore, and the seats that weren't empty, many were filled by Virginia Tech football fans, as they often fill the UVA Scott Stadium seats when the Hokies hit Charlottesville. As apathy has proliferated the fan base, the athletic director, who is as much judged on wins of her coaches as she is judged and held accountable for donations from alumni, ticket sales, and the level of engagement and excitement within the athletic department across the board. And folks, the Virginia football program creates momentum for other programs in the athletic department. When football is performing at a high clip and gaining national attention on national TV outlets, that'll trickle over to some of the Olympic sports or non-revenue generating sports and drive engagement and attention and interest from the Wahoo fan base. We've seen that many times. In a lot of ways, we saw the positive impact that athletics, primarily football and basketball, have had on, say, baseball, have had on, say, tennis, soccer, lacrosse, and some of these non-revenue sports. For Williams, the athletic director, to target Anthony Poindexter, an alumni, a man who was an assistant coach at the University of Virginia, a consensus All-American under George Welsh, a guy who played in the National Football League and had his number 3 jersey retired, a man who has 17 years of assistant coaching experience, including one as the co-defensive coordinator at Penn State. For Carla Williams to pick Poindexter, it's a slam dunk no-brainer. Here's the impact it's going to have on the community, I think, I predict, I believe. The first few games of the 2022 season, interest is going to be through the roof. In fact, a name like Poindexter can carry the fan base throughout an inaugural campaign because his name recognition is that established. This is the type of guy that can help Virginia reestablish in-state recruiting inroads. In-state recruiting inroads that have been overlooked from a coaching staff in Bronco Mendenhall that's not from the Commonwealth, that spent 6 years trying to figure out those inroads because he previously was at Brigham Young University. Now, I'm a fan of Bronco Mendenhall. I said on this program, he likely was instructed by the athletic department and the powers to be to fire some assistant coaches, probably the defensive coordinator, maybe the special teams coach, and Coach Mendenhall did not want to fire his friends and his staff, and instead of making that very difficult decision, he chose to resign in surprising fashion last Thursday evening. He indicated in a statement that he prepared, that he thought about before delivering, that it was 100% his decision to resign and no one else's. You have to ask yourself, if you're the fan base, how will this resignation impact transfers, specifically the quarterback, Brennan Armstrong? The team goes how the quarterback goes. We saw that when Armstrong got hurt. Armstrong returns, the team's going to be okay. Armstrong transfers, you question what 2022 is going to look like. Poindexter's name recognition can help, to use a City Hall term, stabilize the organization, can keep recruits from defecting and transferring or choosing to pursue their eligibility of college football elsewhere because the coach left. Poindexter's hire can keep big-time talent like Armstrong from transferring. Poindexter's hire can strengthen the inroads within the Commonwealth. Poindexter's hire can subdue the apathy the fan base is currently experiencing and inject a level of momentum and excitement that certainly has not been there over the last couple years of Bronco Mendenhall's term. Poindexter's hire could lead to established names like Marcus Hagans staying on the football roster. Marcus Hagans is a head coach waiting to happen, the wide receivers coach under Bronco Mendenhall. I would personally love to see Marcus Hagans retain in the Poindexter coaching regime. Do not be surprised if today or as early as tomorrow, Poindexter is named the head football coach, and then immediately watch as he starts cherry-picking assistant coaching staff talent to fill his roster. Because right now, every college program in the country is thinking about filling a staff and its coaching roster. And to close on this topic, Poindexter's hire will drive local economic growth within Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and Central Virginia. You hire a consensus All-American, one of the most well-credentialed football players in UVA football history, and you name this individual as your head coach, you're going to sell more tickets. And if you sell more tickets, more hotel rooms get booked, more restaurants have butts and seats, more retail shops sell stuff on their shelves, and more money from outside Central Virginia comes into the local economy, and it goes to locally owned businesses. The corner will be hopping, downtown will be hopping, West Main will be hopping, and the hotels will be full. Poindexter makes so much sense for this apathetic fan base. He's the antithesis of apathy and the definition of engagement and excitement. Time will tell. I see the Poindexter hire happening. I see the football facilities being improved because of alumni and fan base engagement. They'll donate more money to the program, and I see the local economy strengthening because of this move. Now, Alex Erpy in a couple of minutes here. Before we get to Senor Alex Erpy, there's a Virginia basketball game on tonight. The Hoos travel to James Madison University. It's a 6:30 tip-off. UVA is a 4.5-point favorite. The Wahoos are 6-3 on the season. 7-2 is JMU. The Dukes are 4-0 at home, so they're a good home basketball team. Virginia has showed some flashes of brilliance, some also flashes of concerns. Over the last 6 games, Virginia is 5-1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-1. They've lost to Iowa 75-74. That second half against Iowa, Virginia basketball had its best offensive showing of the season, the second half against Iowa. The Pittsburgh game, a 57-56 nail-biter. Mr. Gardner, his game winner, hit every aspect of the rim, it seemed. But Virginia now finds itself 6-3 on the season, 1-0 in conference play, with 2 games on the horizon at JMU tonight, and then Fairleigh Dickinson Saturday, 2 o'clock tip at the John Paul Jones Arena. 2 games that are expected victories, and lo and behold, you're going to be 8-3 going into the second ACC regular season contest of the year. That'll be Clemson on the 22nd of December. It's a Wednesday, 8 o'clock tip in Charlottesville. 8-3, 1-0 in conference play, going into that Clemson matchup. I think we would all take that after the loss to Navy to start the year. Virginia got beat like a drum against a team that you would have a difficult time calling a mid-major in Navy. Yes, Navy returned a ton of talent. Yes, they were experienced, and yes, they could shoot the ball from downtown. They lost 66-58 the season opener. And after that loss to the midshipmen, everyone was hella concerned about Virginia basketball. Then you saw what Houston did to Virginia on the road at Houston, and we got even more concerned. But Tony Bennett does what Tony Bennett does. And he figured out, he's working on a rotation, and he's figuring out his starting lineup and how to connect with them. And over the last 6 games, the Hoos have won 5 of 6. There's no superstar on this roster. The closest thing you have to a superstar on this roster is probably Armaan Franklin. Gardner has serious deficiencies in the paint as someone who's 6'6" and cannot jump that high, and whose length and arms and frame are not that long. He's a bruiser. He does not mind some bruising in the paint. He does not mind rebounding and banging bodies. He does not mind scoring in the post. But when you're 6'6" and you can't jump that high, and your arms aren't that long, and your frame's not that long, you have obvious deficiencies. Franklin's your best scoring option. For this team to have success, balance on the offensive end is going to be paramount. You're going to need 4 or 5 guys to post double digits for them to have long-term success this season. And the X factor, because you know Franklin and Gardner are going to get their points. At this time, we know who Kie Clark is. The X factors are probably looking at Reese Beekman, Mr. Shedrick, the big man inside, or maybe one of the bench players. UVA 4.5-point favorite at JMU, 6:30 tip esta noche. 2 other items and then Alex Erpy. Siren Restaurant, Laura Fauner's Vision, opens Thursday of this week, Old Shabine location. Laura Fauner's A+. She is a fantastic chef. If it wasn't for COVID and the pandemic, Laura Fauner would be the owner of Dooner's Restaurant right now. If she had her druthers, she'd probably be the #1 at Dooner's, because it probably would have prevented a little bit of a hiatus between leaving Dooner's and where she's at now in Siren. I think Siren is a fantastic idea. at a fantastic space with a good-looking menu, led by a chef that's unafraid to take chances. Throw in the mix that Laura Fonner and her family, blood, sweat, and tears in the revitalization of the restaurant, the remodel of the restaurant, and you know that this restaurant is her baby, is putting it mildly. She goes balls to the wall in everything she does. You got parking in front of the restaurant. That's a plus. You got a veranda that's as good an outdoor seating as you're going to find in the restaurant scene in Charlottesville. I can't think of many verandas or outside seatings that are better than Sirens. Maybe you make the argument for the Biltmore on Ellwood having a larger, more spacious veranda, but that's different clientele, UVA students, versus Sirens going to be more locals. So you got parking in front of the building, you got phenomenal outside seating, you got an excellent location, you got an own sidebar that can accommodate the bar business, you got a large dining room, you got the je ne sais quoi that comes with a brand new restaurant, and the public and marketplace excited to try the novelty that goes with the new restaurant. You got a superstar chef with brand recognition in the Fonner name, a gal who's been on Guy's Grocery Games, and you see why this restaurant's going to have some success, especially on the front end. And knowing Fonner, she's going to put so much into this that the menu's going to be constantly innovating and changing. I like this. I like this. I like the Mediterranean seafood. I like that she put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. And I like the fact that she is hungry to perform. In fact, probably even motivated by some bad pandemic luck that kept her from taking over a restaurant in Duners as an owner that she adored and grew up in. I think she's going to have a lot of success with Siren at the Shabine location. Last topic, J-Dubs, before we get Alex on here in about 45 seconds. Roanoke, downtown Roanoke, is no longer hospitable to houseless. It's not homeless anymore. It's now the preferred nomenclature is houseless. Downtown Roanoke is no longer hospitable to houseless people. City Council last night, 5-2 vote in Roanoke, passed an ordinance banning downtown sleeping by the houseless population. The houseless population sleeping in downtown Roanoke by the flock, by the droves. The reason I bring this up to you is we have a similar trend happening here in the city of Charlottesville. And as other jurisdictions that are in close proximity, there's a keeping up with the Joneses impact. Downtown Roanoke, you can't sleep there if you're houseless anymore. Well, the city of Charlottesville do the same. The reason houseless individuals aggregate in downtown Charlottesville is because the shelters and the soup kitchens are around downtown Charlottesville. So in between meals, breakfast and dinner, breakfast and lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you have some hours to pass before your next free meal. So you aggregate or you hang around the shelters or soup kitchens. The Downtown Business Owners Association has stated the impact that houseless people have on the downtown economy and ecosystem. There's a reason there's not that many benches, if any at all, on the downtown mall. Because the DBAC, Downtown Business Owners Association, had those benches removed based on the fact that houseless individuals were seating on the benches and negatively impacting downtown foot traffic and customer experience. Roanoke City Council has now banned houseless people sleeping in downtown Roanoke, 5-2 vote. Let's see the impact that this will have in a keeping up with the Joneses society on the next council that comes. Juan Wade and Brian Pinkston replacing Nikiah Walker and Heather Hill. The council of 2022, 2023, so 2 years straight, you'll have Pinkston, Wade, Snook, McGill, and Payne. Those five, I would very much say, are much more pro-business than the five we have now. Time will tell the impact it has. All right, Judah Woodcarroll, let's welcome Alex Erpy to the show. Alex, friend of the program, a friend of Real Talk, love the Erpy family. He just had some lunch before. Where'd you have lunch, my friend?
Marco and Luca.
Oh, very nice.
Dumplings. Yep, I love them. We gave them Chuck Lewis Passion Award from Fort Adelante some years back.
Very nice. So this is Alex Erpy, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. We'll cut straight to the chase. Did the market overreact last week to Omicron?
Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and we kind of knew it. This isn't even just a 2020 hindsight thing. You and I were talking about it last week, that given the information that we knew at the time, it seemed like an overreaction. And I think the last few days, as more volume comes into the market, is showing that many people just saw that little blip as a buying opportunity, and now the market's rebounding. And again, now you're having more officials say what we knew at the time, which is that the only information we have is more mild, potentially more transmissible, and that's nothing to panic over.
Do you think we've seen more retail investors in the market today? Retail investors synonymous with the average Joes than ever before. And as we have more retail investors in markets today than ever before, are they most likely to get spooked by bad news, or if it bleeds, it leads headlines leading to sell-offs?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes to the first part. I definitely think we're seeing more retail investors than we have before.
Because the technology's there.
The technology's there. I think the pandemic gave a little extra cash to be able to play in the markets, to be able to participate a little more in the markets.
More digestible information than ever before.
Absolutely. The ability on certain platforms to even buy shares of stock. So the price of a stock. So you think about a Tesla. I mean, you're looking at something.
1,400.
Exactly. Difficult to buy if you couldn't buy a slice of it. Now you're able to buy a $5, $10 piece of it. In terms of their impact on sell-offs, that's tougher to say because they're still such a small, by dollar amount, size of the part of the market. And I think the major movements are probably still happening by major institutional players making moves. So
it was the institutional players that were spooked last week?
Oh, institutions do not like uncertainty. So I would suspect that institutional traders were most spooked last week. Those are the people that uncertainty is the number one fear, and those are the groups most impacted by. Let's not forget, this was simultaneous with Powell talking about we're going to continue tapering. Tapering is a spook for institutional players, not for retail. You and I, what do we care? We're not borrowing from the Federal Reserve. Do we care really what they do with their interest rate, or if they're continuing to shell out money? Not really. The institutional players care much more deeply about that and are more easily spooked by that.
This is a perfect segue into Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon's comments this morning, and echoes what you said this morning on Real Talk, that he's most concerned with the Fed and Congress and policymakers having an impact on the economy next year and not the pandemic. He says we should be way more terrified of what government's going to do to markets and not what this pandemic is going to do to markets. You buy that?
To be honest, we're beginning to reach the point where I do think that the pendulum has shifted in that direction, because most of the damage of the pandemic has been done in terms of the fact that we're now at endemic phase. In other words, the uncertainty of what the pandemic can bring is beginning to fade away into the certainty that COVID is here to stay and it's not going anywhere. And from everything we know, from everything we know about science, right, and the way that that viruses work, they become, right, the goal of any virus is to become more transmissible and less deadly over time. Viruses don't like to become more deadly because then you kill off the host, you can't spread, right? So given that we're now in that phase where it's becoming more and more certain that this is endemic, this is not going anywhere, the major uncertainties left are not really, will there be COVID? Because that's pretty clear that it's not going anywhere. But what will responses to COVID look like? What will be local or state government responses to outbreaks? What will be the federal government response to new variants? Will we see a push to close borders every time there is a new variant from a country in Africa or Asia? Will we close borders if a new variant shows up in Canada? Or is this only if it's really far away? Or if a new variant shows up in Mexico, will we close that border? Will we suddenly put a bunch of guards on the southern border? So all these questions come into play based on what will be government response and fiscal, not just in terms of borders and National Guard and so forth, but also what will be the fiscal response to changes, to new variants, to changes in the news, to caseloads. I mean, is the federal government going to be tracking cases ad infinity? I mean, to the end of time, and anytime cases rise a little, that'll change policy. And so those are the things that I think trigger more economic fears, because those are things that are uncertain. In other words, we can say with certainty that COVID will be here. We cannot say with certainty right now what government response will be at any given time to any change in COVID circumstances, because it seems to change dramatically for things that are similar. I mean, when I recall when Delta first showed up, there was no closure of borders. There wasn't a sudden rush to close borders. We didn't really see a new influx suddenly of policy to deal with Delta. But with Omicron, we saw an instant suggestion, well, let's just close our border to South Africa. And so if one variant can do it, but not others, that creates uncertainty. That means that you as the investor or the small business owner are sitting there saying, if there is a new variant, I don't actually know what the policy response to that is going to be, because it's been vastly different depending on which variant it is. So that leads to uncertainty, which I think is a bigger issue for the economy.
How do you think we've managed it here locally so far?
So far, I mean, Charlottesville seems to be on the steadier side. I haven't heard, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't heard in Charlottesville, Albemarle, any major suggested changes based on changing of number of COVID cases or based on new variant. That seems to be stable, which I think is more helpful.
The only uncertain change, or the only change that impacted the economy more than I think, I would say, let me rephrase this. The one ordinance that I think in hindsight had the largest negative impact on the local economy was how UVA students were managed on the onset of the pandemic and returning them to grounds or allowing them to study from home or abroad. Once they took out 20,000 plus customers and the dad's credit cards that come with them, that impacted the local economy more than any other ordinance that Charlottesville has seen. And that came from Governor Ralph Northam in Richmond, and not locally from City Council. Would you agree that had the biggest impact, or do you have another one that had a similar type of impact?
Talking local and state?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the interesting thing is, as you said, most of what I can think of locally that had a detrimental impact on the economy was, in essence, state mandated.
Right.
So percent of I would say, if not that, then the seating restrictions. Just thinking of restaurants and businesses, to tell small businesses in small places that you need to have X number of feet between even masked individuals, that severely limits the number of customers.
Absolutely. For restaurants that are already on margin right here. Carol Thorpe, hello. James Watson, Vanessa Parkhill, hello, and welcome to the program. We'll get to your comments here in a matter of moments. Kevin, we'll get to yours as well. This is an interesting one that's come in and on Twitter. And do you see, I'll paraphrase this, are there sectors or spaces that Alex and Emergent like best for next year?
For next year, that's a great question. Some of the ones we're looking at in particular going forward as I would say, opportunistic pieces of a portfolio. So not your core. We're not really changing what we think is core to a portfolio, but opportunistically, very much continuing to be interested, I should say, in biotech and clean energy. Both of those have struggled a little this year, which I think makes them a good opportunity. As much as we can make fun of this, there is such a thing called reversion to the mean. And especially if you believe that the underlying technology hasn't suddenly become useless, which I don't think anyone would argue that
No,
10 plus years from now, we won't want more clean energy and more biotech.
100%.
Right? So that's, I think, a good opportunity that we're looking at next year. I might also add to that, we're very much interested going forward for that opportunistic space in robotics and in a little bit, probably a very small piece, space. There's several space ETFs now that are thinking next level in terms of, and sometimes people think of space and you think of Jeff Bezos going up in a rocket and circling, and coming back down. But when we think of space, the real technological advances to be made there are in mining. What are particular, not just minerals, but also resources, natural resources that are on the moon, natural resources that are on asteroids, natural resources that we may need and that can fuel future growth that are not easily accessible on planet Earth. And those, I think, Nick has written he's got a great blog post on this if you go to emergentfs.com. On our blog there from, I think, several months ago, he was really ahead of this in terms of what that means, sort of re-engaging people to say when we talk space companies, we're not talking space tourism or Jeff Bezos having a great time. We're talking things that are legitimate uses. Richard Branson. We're talking legitimate uses of space exploration that actually have major economic impacts. So that's one of the ones that maybe that's like a 20-year picture that you put a small piece in now and say, hey, you know what, if this takes off in the next 20 years, I'm glad I was in on it on the early stage.
Follow-up question. This is an interesting one. This is a different topic. Why is it, Alex, that ETFs don't earn the growth that, say, individual stocks do? Could you give us some insight into that? That's from Katie. That's a good question from Katie.
That's a great question, Katie. So any individual stock, and I think a lot of them this depends on the stocks. In other words, occasionally, of course, an ETF will probably out-earn one of those really big blue chip stocks, right? Your Coca-Colas, they're not going to go much up or down in a year. The reason why, particularly in the growth space, you're not going to see, in other words, a growth ETF, Russell 2000, great example, small cap companies, right? Russell 2000 is never, let's say it goes up 20% in a year, you're going to have a handful of companies in that ETF that are probably your huge winners. You're 100%, 200%. And the reason, because you're combining their systemic risk, which is the entire sector, with company-specific risk. And the key thing to think about with investing is the risk-reward is a spectrum. You take more risk to obtain more reward. So if you're going to go low risk with the company, if you're going to buy a Coca-Cola, you can't expect Coca-Cola to go up 100% in 2 years. Right? If you take a lot of risk on a really small biotech company, you do have a good expectation. That's your goal. Your goal is that thing's going to go up over 100%. Because if you're buying all biotech companies and they're all going up 10%, and then you have some that go bankrupt, you're in the wrong business, right? So with a company-specific risk, you're taking on the additional risk that this one company won't just be in a sector that does well, but that they will be a major player in that sector. That they'll either tip the market, they'll hit 50% of market share, that they will come up with a new product that's better than their competitors. And that's an added level of risk, which means, of course, if that company does well, you've been compensated for that risk. But if they are not the winner in their sector, then you lose out because the sector as a whole will outperform them. So when you buy an ETF, you're diversifying. You're saying, I don't want to take on company-specific risk. I believe in this sector, so I'm going to have a very small piece of all the companies in this sector in the form of an ETF, so that if this sector goes up, I participate in that upside, but I don't have the added risk. I'm not looking for that 100%, yearly return. I'm looking at, can growth give me 20% annually over a long period of time?
Good answer. So I'm going to rattle off the ones I have. I got the Spider S&P 500 ETF,
Okay.
SPY, the Spider Dow Jones Industrial Average DIA, iShares Russell 1000 IWB, iShares TR Russell 2000 IWM,
IWM,
the 3Qs, QQQ, NASDAQ
NASDAQ.
ETF, and the Spider S&P Midcap 400 ETF MDY. And I'll add this to Katie's question. What percentage of the portfolio should be ETFs versus individual stocks?
That's a great question. That depends, I think, a lot on your size as an investor.
And
So-
also your age.
And your age. If you are as an example, right? Let's say you are your average person, so your sub $1 million investment account.
Okay.
So your average person of let's say on the younger to older side, right? So I could even make a very large range, probably 20 to 60, really.
Okay.
You're probably going to be looking mostly ETFs. And the reason is you don't have too much management to be able to say I can afford to take X 2% of my portfolio and put it in one company, right? You might say I can take 2% of my portfolio and put it in a very risky sector, but to then be able to buy, right? One of the beauties of ETFs, right, is think about IWM, right? That's a $250, I think, share price.
Let's see, I can tell you right now.
It's in the 200s.
IWM is $224.67
$224
as of right now.
So $224 share price. Within IWM, if you tried to buy, let's say that's not 2,000. If you tried to buy 10 stocks from IWM, pick 10 ones you thought these are real winners, you need more than $224. You just flat out cannot find enough.
He's saying if you add up all the
individual share prices,
is over
to get one share,
224.
you probably don't have to be looking at more
100%.
than 224. So it enables you to participate in the market without having to really worry about how do I actually obtain all these shares, particularly on smaller companies. Your big ones, yes, you can get if you go to some of these brokerages now have you buy stock slices. So you can buy a $5 piece of Apple, right? But a smaller company is not giving you a $5 piece of that. You either can afford the share price or you cannot. So it enables you to participate. As you increase the size of your portfolio, as you grow, as you save more over time, and you hit that sweet spot of your 30s, 40s, 50s, you have a very large portfolio, then maybe you can consider you say, okay, I'm going to take my 2 to 4% opportunistic piece. Maybe there's a stock I really feel strongly about, and I'm willing to take that chance with this stock because I think it's a real winner. Then you'd begin to go into that. Again, as you get older and you are beginning to approach retirement, you then need to rethink, all right, how do I begin
Your risk
to
profile.
move your risk profile? You
Yeah.
need to become more conservative because your number one risk within 5 years of retirement and in the first few years of retirement is you do not want to participate in the downside of a market crash.
All right, make a compelling argument on why a retail investor, someone that does not have, say, the foresight to go to Emergent Financial Services for their wealth management, because that's the firm you guys want to be talking to, Emergent Financial Services. Let's say it's a retail investor. Make a legitimate argument why that retail investor should have all his or her money in ETFs.
I would say because your number one risk, right, is that you fail to participate in the market's growth because you picked the wrong company. And what I mean by that is the goal for the individual investor, right, just in terms of saving for retirement, is you want to be targeting, ideally, as you're on the younger side, that 7% annualized return sweet spot. That's what you're aiming for. That's what doubles your money every 10 years. And that's the powerful tool. Granted, some years you're going to get more. Would be great if you knew it, but you're targeting that in order to go forward there. You want to do that with as little risk as possible.
And doesn't the ETF provide you that?
ETF provides you with that because
Okay, so
it
you're making the
diversifies the
argument
risk.
that having the entire portfolio, if you're a retail investor, in ETFs is not a bad thing.
Oh, it's not. It is
yeah.
not.
Okay.
That's what I would argue, that it
Okay.
is not a bad thing. The ETFs provides you the ability to diversify because what you want to do is participate in the growth of the economy, not necessarily to outperform it. And I think that's where the challenge lies, right? If you, as an individual, if you can just participate in the growth of the economy over the next 20 to 30 years,
You're
you're
in
going to
the
be
driver's
set.
seat.
You're going to be set for retirement. You do not need to outperform it.
Okay, so these are questions that I'm asking for me personally here. So I completely hear what you're saying, and I'm looking at the returns here. The Spider Midcap 400, 32% on the year. iShares Russell 1000, 23% plus on the year. The Spider S&P 500,
That's
22.
high 20s, 22.
Yeah. Spider Dow Jones, 14 and change. In fact, the worst performing one, depending on the day, is either the 3Qs or the iShares Russell 2000 IWM that's at 13% and change. So I see that these are substantial returns in these ETFs, exchange traded funds. But the greed in me sees the returns from my NVIDIAs and my AMDs and my Apples and my ServiceNows and now the Metas and even Microsoft ticking in at 37% here. So like the greed in me is like the individual stocks is going to yield the most, but at the same time, the individual stock is also the one that could lose the most.
Exactly.
It goes up, like you taught me this, goes up like an escalator, but comes down like an elevator.
Exactly, and that's how it works. So that's the risk, right? Obviously, the greed in us looks at this because we've had two basically bull years, major bull years of market. In fact, we haven't had a bear market year since 10 or 11. I think 11 since 2011. Maybe 15 was a little flat, but we haven't had a major bear market year for a long time. So, of course, the individual stocks look very attractive because you've got your winners there that look really good. The challenge is if you hit that downside, right, or if you pick the stock that doesn't do as well, it's a lot harder to get out of it. And that's the challenge, because with an individual stock, you may need to. And what I mean by that is, so let's say you've got, because we always tell people the key is stay in the market. So if you're invested in Russell 2000, Russell 1000, S&P 500, and the market begins to crash, you don't sell, right? Because you know that the market is not going to zero, right? If the economy goes to a complete zero, we have worse issues than our stock portfolios, right? But the market is not going to zero. So you hold, and it's easy to hold. It's comfortable to hold because you know this is the 500 biggest stocks in the United States. I'm not going to sell because it went down 10%. I'm going to hold on, and it'll come back. If you have an individual stock, let's say you pick one. You say, all right, it's a biotech stock I really believe in. I buy it. And now that thing starts going down 10, 20%. Do you sell? It's a much more difficult decision because that stock can go to zero. If that biotech company is not the one, if they have a product that fails FDA testing and they can't go forward with that product, that stock can lose 80, 90%. Happens all the time. It happens plenty of times. Those stocks can go down. GE has never recovered from, now granted, if you bought it at 2 and it went up to 8, you look great. But if you had it way back in the day, that share price went down a long way. And it may not recover because it's an individual company. Whereas if you owned a piece of if you have the Dow Jones, right? The Dow Jones may have 10, 20% corrections, but you know that's coming back because the economy grows over time. If you have an individual stock, you have a much harder decision to make from a behavioral perspective of, do I hold on to this stock and ride this thing to the bottom? Or do I at some point have to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the one. And maybe this company just isn't going to do well because it happens all the time. And that's a much more difficult decision to make as the average investor.
Alex Erpy, Knowledge Bombs today on a Tuesday. Thursday today, Mañana. Give them some insight into the guests you got for Thursday.
The two
I'm
very
excited
fun
for
guests.
Thursdays.
Jeff Kamratz, he's the owner of Aqua Seaville.
Have you met him yet?
I've not met him yet.
He's great.
We're excited about it because, local entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk with him, learn a little bit about, what led him to this business, how he operates, just as a service-oriented entrepreneur here in Charlottesville. And then on the other hand, another entrepreneur, we have the owner of 12 Ridges Winery. So that'll be a little bit more of the agricultural space than your service-oriented in terms of just what his philosophy is, where how he decides on his grapes, what it's like to run a winery out in that area, not too far from here. It's out a little bit of ways, but two really fun guests that I think will teach us a lot about entrepreneurship, which we love.
We were at 12 Ridges on Saturday on Judah's recommendation over there for Christmas trees.
Oh, they sell Christmas trees as well?
They let you cut them down. In fact, that's where the Wickhauer family generally, correct me if I'm wrong, goes for Christmas tree cutting, right? Not this year, but
Mini chainsaw and find us a good tree. And
see,
There you go.
he's smarter than I. They go with the chainsaw, where I was going with the handsaw.
Oh,
The handsaw is brutal to cut.
take a while.
Yeah,
That might
it's
take you-
the angle is very difficult. Is the problem because you're lying on the ground,
Yep.
cutting there. You've done that, right? Cut the tree down with the handsaw. It's not an easy task here.
I don't know if I have.
Yeah, he's smarter than I am.
June's
So
like, I'm too smart. I've
He's
always had the
smart.
chainsaw.
12 ridges.
Oh, we
and-
have to go there. We're
Dude,
looking for.
it's
I'm getting
fun.
ready for my Christmas tree time. I need to go find
And
myself
the
a
wine
Christmas
is good
tree.
too. Jeff Camrath is going to be fantastic, guys. Just a fantastic entrepreneur. Alex, I find our talks very informative, and I especially enjoy them.
Same here. Same
Yeah.
here. I love coming on every Tuesday.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alex Erpy, guys, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. Find them online, emergentfinancialservices.com. Nicholas Erpy says, hard work pays off, Jerry. Don't worry. Thank you very much, Nick Erpy. You know I love you, homie. Carol Thorpe says, the best news is that Mayor Nikaya Walker comes down from her pedestal in 25 days. Carol Thorpe, I echo that as well. Carol Thorpe says, in a response to Vanessa Parkhill has got a comment on the statues, and Carol responds to that comment on the statues by saying, the Lee statue is going to the Jefferson School for melting down. Jackson statue may still go for sale if the entity who offered to buy him with Lee will still buy it. And she adds that she had some other elements about the statues as well on our I Love Seville Facebook page. Please check those out. Vanessa adds that defense was the saving grace for my Nittany Lions this year. Now it appears both our defensive coordinators will be heading south. I'm worried about 2020 in Happy Valley. Kudos to VT and UVA for recruiting top-notch talent to lead their programs. Here's the interesting thing, and she's right. Defensive coordinators at Penn State, one's at Virginia Tech, and the other one could end up at the University of Virginia. So James Franklin's influence certainly being felt here in Charlottesville. James Watson says this about Anthony Poindexter. Anthony Poindexter represents a lot of positive things about Virginia. He graduated on time. He opted to stay an extra year to get his degree as opposed to going pro early. He was here during the longest positive streak Virginia football has ever had. All of the former players have the utmost respect for him. He's from the region, and anybody who's ever met him knows he's a quality guy. James Watson, well done. I think the Poindexter hire yields the following results. 1, a fan base transitions from apathetic to excited with the Poindexter hire. And the Virginia fan base is at an apathy level right now that I saw at the end of the Mike London era and the end of the Al Groh era. We have not seen a sold-out Scott Stadium since Southern California visited Charlottesville. Empty seats, every home game. When's the last time you've seen a sellout? It was when the Southern California Trojans visited Charlottesville. Apathy with the Virginia fan base, especially after how Virginia lost to the Hokies in Charlottesville, especially after that 3rd down and 8 call, 3rd down and goal call from the 8, where you pass a lateral to an offensive lineman. The fan base is at an all-time low from an apathy, excitement standpoint. That is safe to say. First impact positive Poindexter has is apathy transitions to excitement. Second impact Poindexter has is the wealthy alumni are going to start opening their checkbooks and their wallets to improving facility infrastructure for the football program. And facility infrastructure for the football program is not in a good situation, and this keeping up with the Joneses, recruits comparing facilities with other colleges and universities in the ACC or SEC. UVA is way behind, and it's shocking to say that considering the wealth of this school. The third positive impact the Poindexter hire has is in-state recruiting inroads. Over the last 6 years, Bronco and his staff had no real ties to Charlottesville, no real ties to the Commonwealth. It's a staff from BYU that came to the East Coast. Poindexter has those in-state ties. Fourth, I think Poindexter could keep some of the quality coaching staff that we need around. A Marcus Hagans is much more likely to stay on staff in Charlottesville if Poindexter, another UVA football alumni, just like Biscuit Hagans, if Poindexter gets the job, I would not be surprised if Biscuit Hagans stays on the coaching staff. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Biscuit Hagans gets promoted to like a recruiting coordinator, maybe even an OC. Time will tell. Fifth, I think the Poindexter hire keeps Brennan Armstrong in the program. I can assure you Brennan Armstrong, the best player on the team, is considering who the head coach is going to be when considering whether or not he's going to transfer or not. And the Poindexter hire is going to be good for Main Street, for the corner, for West Main, for mom and pops, hotels, restaurants, shops, breweries, wineries. Because the Poindexter hire will lead to more ticket sales, potential sellouts, and an influx of cash flow into the Charlottesville economy. It's a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer. And I think it could happen. I mean, you got my homie Jerry Ratcliffe saying that this hire could happen as early as today, as late as potentially tomorrow. All right, that's the show. I promised you one other item. The building next to the old Music Resource Building. Remember Music Resource Building there on the corner of West Main by the Sacagawea Lewis and Clark statue? It had a salon in it. It's got beautiful windows. It's got street frontage, massive square feet. It's currently for rent. It's literally the brick building next to the church. If you're looking at the old Music Resource Center, the church, the building next to it, 300 West Main, and the storefront unit, which is unit 201, is currently for rent. I follow this stuff closely. You're looking at roughly 3,000 square feet, 2,849 square feet to be exact. You can negotiate the term of this deal because it sat empty for a while. In fact, the landlord, and I believe this is a Cagine property, Alan Cagine property, the landlord is offering discounted rent of $19.70 for the remainder of the year. And thereafter, rent jumps to $39.40 at 2X's. So this is $4K a month rent for that storefront with the windows right next to the old Music Resource Center, 300 West Main, unit 201. You're getting basically 3,000 square feet and thousands of cars, if not 10,000 plus, driving by you each day. Interesting piece of property. The predicament you're going to have here is the parking. And it's why it's sat vacant along with the price tag. Because the finishes and the space is gorgeous. But parking is difficult here. And so is a $4,000 a month price tag asking. We'll follow that listing closely on the I Love CVille show. My name is Jerry Miller. I appreciate you watching and listening and spreading the gospel. That is the I Love CVille show. Spread the gospel. That is this program, please. Thank you to Carol, to Vanessa. Thank you to everybody else that interacted with us today. James, we appreciate you as well. Scott, we appreciate you. Loyal, longtime listeners and viewers, we're very appreciative of your interaction on the program. You guys have a good afternoon. Take care.